Hello there. Welcome back to the Schools of Excellence podcast. If you've been listening to this for a really long time, the podcast, I appreciate your consistency. I appreciate your loyalty in showing up week after week and committing to your development and your growth as a leader. I think consistency feels really, really hard for a lot of different reasons. And in my book, This Can't Be Normal, I actually have a whole chapter on consistency because I think it's actually really underspoken about, or it's spoken about with a lot of shame, or a lot of judgment and a lot of, if you just did this, then everything would be fine. And I don't think high achievers need any more of if you just did this, everything would be fine. I think there needs to be a little bit more real understanding and a gentle witnessing into what it actually takes to build sustainable excellence. So I talk about how consistency isn't boring, it's vulnerable. Because there was such a long stretch of my own leadership where I resisted the ordinary, right? Consistency requires you to show up in the ordinary moments, right? And so for so many years in my leadership, I chased intensity, big pushes, packed calendars, bursts of momentum, and then I would disappear. I'd retreat, I would go do a reset, and I would convince myself that this time after my reset and my inspiration and whatever it is, something had finally changed. But it wasn't. Because I was still tied to the same thing, which was my ego. I didn't trust the quiet. I didn't know how to stay with slow, steady rhythms of leadership without needing a spike of urgency or relief from a collapse. And that is really what my real work became. I needed to learn how to stay steady no matter what was going on around me. I needed to learn how to show up when nothing dramatic was happening. I needed to learn how to trust progress that I couldn't see yet, even when no one was clapping for me. And this was really hard for me to sit with because I needed to recognize that staying busy felt a lot safer than being steady. And I think we confuse consistency with it being boring, but consistency is vulnerable. It's dangerous to the ego. Because when I was sprinting and moving really fast, when something didn't get done or I didn't show up for something, I could be like, but I was really busy. But what do you mean? I'm really busy. And then when I was exhausted and I didn't do something, I could be like, but I was so tired, but I was exhausted. So I always had somewhere to hide. I always had excuses to hide behind. But when I started to hold steady rhythms, weekly check-ins, predictable conversations, returning even when nothing felt urgent, I lost all of my excuses. I was just there, present, seen, not heroic, not collapsing. And that felt so exposing. Consistency strips away your armor. It asks you to be known, not as the fixer, not as the rescuer, not as the one who shows up when everything is on fire. It asks you to show up as the steady presence. And for many leaders, it's really scary to be a steady steward of leadership. I hear very often, I'm doing the walkthroughs, I'm holding the one-on-ones, I'm checking in week after week. Nothing big is changing. But beneath that statement, there's a quiet ache. If it were working, shouldn't I be able to see it by now? Because that's the vulnerable part. Consistency asks you to keep giving without proof that it's working yet. No adrenaline, no immediate feedback, no applause, presence. Brené Brown, in her famous viral TED Talk that has gotten, at this point, I think over 20 million views, she defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. That's exactly what consistency demands. Because when you're consistent and you show up and you do that gratitude practice, even when you're not in the mood, and you do that one-on-one, even when 3 teachers called out, and you run those enrollment rhythms, even when there is a licensing visit, you don't get the high and the dopamine hit of urgency. You don't get the validation of being needed. You don't get to be the hero. You just keep showing up. And for many of us whose identity has been shaped by output and fixing and rescuing, consistency feels like a free-for-all. It feels like literally standing at the top of the cliff and saying, jump. Because when things slow down enough to be consistent, things will start to surface. Feelings that you've outrun, doubts that you've drowned out in busyness, grief that you never had time to feel. Consistency creates space, and space tells the truth. And the truth is freaking terrifying a lot of the time. You know, this is a very personal episode in a lot of ways because, I mean, this was so much of my work and so much of what I needed to do. For years, my worth was tied to what I produced, to what I fixed, to what I solved. And so when I stopped sprinting and running and chasing, I had to sit with a question that finally caught up with me. Who am I when I'm not producing? Who am I when I'm not needed? And that's why consistency feels so hard. Yeah, it's boring, but also because it reveals where we have built our identity on output or avoidance or escaping instead of presence. Presence is vulnerable because it requires connection and intimacy. And what I've learned in my own leadership and in working with hundreds of school leaders and in watching leaders, the ordinary rhythms, those boring rhythms, they change everything. Not in a week, not in a dramatic moment, but very, very quietly. Because it shows up as fewer callouts, teams that stop bracing for the next shoe to drop, staff who stay through hard seasons, cultures that don't collapse the moment pressure comes. One of the most amazing rhythms that I've seen deliver outsized results for the rhythm that it is the gratitude rhythm. And I share the gratitude rhythm in my book, This Can't Be Normal, in my chapter on generosity. Generosity is one of the anchors. And the rhythm of gratitude is not random praise or mood-based gestures of like bringing in a coffee cart or buying bagels or donuts or whatever it is. It's a consistent practice. And whenever I do leadership retreats or I work with leaders, whether I'm one-on-one or I'm coming to lead an event or I'm doing a coaching call in our Leadership HQ program, I often ask leaders, how many of you have ever bought something for your team after a really difficult season? So there was a difficult season and everyone pushed hard and you went to go buy donuts, coffee, bagels, Starbucks, gift cards, you name it, right? Everyone raises their hand. There's no one that hasn't done that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That's not what I'm saying here. What I am showing is that we have normalized mood-based gestures to chaos. So after chaos, we show up and we're like, here, thanks for holding the chaos. But what about predictable presence of gratitude, of having a predictable practice where you show up and you tell people why you're grateful that they're working for you and they're working on this team and they're part of the company. And I break down the entire rhythm inside of my book, This Can't Be Normal. I have a whole podcast episode on the gratitude rhythm. It's I don't know, the 3rd or 4th episode on this podcast that I recorded like 4 years ago. The episode still holds. We can link that in the show notes here as well. But the power of the gratitude practice, what's so powerful is people see dramatic decreases in call out. They see massive increases in retention, in people coming on time. We had several clients who reported 0 call outs for a 3-week container after running the gratitude rhythm for 2 months. Now, It's difficult to run something for 2 months and not see any return and then start to see sustainable returns, but only if you keep doing it. So what happens is that they see the return and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. No one's calling out anymore. And then they're like, this is great. We could stop doing the gratitude. I'm like, no, that is literally what got you to a place where you don't have call outs, right? Like that's the power of boring, consistent rhythms is it brings the very calm that you desire. So where leaders get stuck and where many leaders stumble is they confuse consistency with perfection. They miss one meeting and they're like, you see, I'm inconsistent. I just can't do it. Or they don't do something and they're like, you see, I can't be trusted. The ego loves this because it jumps in and it makes a verdict immediately. But this is something, and I write about this in my book. Consistency isn't perfection. Consistency is return. You will miss a beat. You will forget to do something. You will falter. You will hurt someone. You will say the wrong thing. You will, because you're human. So living in delusion and fantasy world and magical thinking of there's going to be a day, one day, that I'm never going to make a mistake, that I'm always going to say the right thing, that I'm always going to have a perfectly regulated nervous system, that I'm never going to ever forget to do something that I said I was going to do, that I'm always going to remember how to respond to this particular teacher, that I'm going to remember that this is how the teacher likes her name spelled, and I'm never going to misspell her name again. That I'm going to always say her name exactly how she likes to say it. She likes to be called Jen, not Jennifer, and I'm always going to remember that. I'm never, ever, ever going to forget that that's what she likes, even though I only see her 3 times a year. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. You're human. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to forget things. You're going to forget things. The question is not whether you'll drop the rhythm, but are you going to return? Right? I spoke to an owner and she was beating herself up that she missed a commitment. And I said, commitment is return. Forgetting once doesn't mean that you failed forever. It's data. It's like, okay, something needs adjusting. Something needs a guardrail. Something needs a little bit more support in this area. And when you model return of coming back to it and repairing, like I speak about in the book, repair rhythms, return rhythms without shame, you give yourself and your team permission not to shame yourselves when something breaks. Because think about the relationships that matter most in your life, okay? They are not built on grand gestures. Marriage, parenting, friendship. They're built in the small moments of turning toward one another again and again and again. Trust doesn't come from one big leadership retreat. It doesn't. Leadership retreats are nice. I'm not against them. I'm against thinking that that's the thing that's going to build trust and morale for the rest of the year. It's not. Trust comes from showing up predictably and consistently and reliably. Enrollment doesn't grow because you did an open house. Enrollment grows from steady rhythms of follow-through and tours and lead follow-up. Your culture doesn't shift from a single speech or a Slack message. It shifts from ordinary moments of connection held consistently, repeatably, and predictably. And I think consistency feels heavy for many of us because it asks us to lay down our armor. People and your teams do not need your intensity. They need your steadiness. And consistency is vulnerable and it's courageous. And it's the bridge that really carries us through real life. So if this conversation stirred something in you, if you recognize yourself in the resistance, in the returning, in the quiet courage that it takes to stay and keep showing up and keep returning, you'll find this thread woven throughout the entire book of This Can't Be Normal. Because This Can't Be Normal is not about doing more and working harder. It's about learning how to lead in a way that actually holds real life, that has misbeats and grief and seasons and returns, And so if you want a place to slow down with these ideas, to sit with them instead of skimming past them, this book opens the door. And whether you pick it up now or you pick it up later, again, you could get it wherever books are sold. I'm really glad that you're here. I'm really glad that you're showing up. You should be proud that you're still returning, that you're still listening to this podcast. So whether you have capacity to read the book now, or maybe you've got the book and that's your first step, but you haven't read it, or you've read the first chapter, you're making consistent moves towards becoming a leader that stewards sustainable leadership and predictable returns. And that is what's commendable. That is what is beautiful. So thank you for joining me here today. I hope you do pick up the copy. The link is in the show notes again, wherever books are sold. This Can't Be Normal: What to Do When Success Starts to Feel Like Survival. Thanks so much for joining me. Hey there. If you're the one who notices problems before anyone else does, this is for you. You're the one who sees things first. The tension in the room, the teacher sleeping who just might quit. You're already tracking the consequences. Who will be upset? Who will push back? So even on days that look fine or feel calm, your body doesn't fully stand down. You go to sleep tired and you wake up already bracing. Not because today is chaotic or any day is chaotic, but because something could go wrong. And you know you'll be the one that's holding it. It's the responsibility that can sometimes feel crushing. You stay alert, reliable, and steady because you've seen what happens when things aren't held, when communications slip, when standards soften, when everyone assumes someone else will step in. And because you're so good at holding it, more of it finds its way to you, quietly, gradually, until no one sees how heavy it's become. This is not burnout, and this is not a discipline problem. It's what I call the invisible weight of leadership. If you see yourself in this, or even if your breath changed just a little bit, that's enough. And if you want to keep going and learn more, the opening chapter of my book, This Can't Be Normal: What to Do When Success Starts to Feel Like Survival. My book continues this conversation. You can go ahead and download chapter 1 for free and continue this dialogue. If you are loving the Schools of Excellence podcast and have gotten any value out of it for your school, I would love if you can do 2 things for me. 1, subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And 2, can you please leave us a review? Reviews help other school leaders know that this is the place to learn how to build a school of excellence. And I would be so grateful if you can do that for us. Your help and support makes this show to be able to be listened by the thousands of other school leaders all around the world. Thanks so much for listening, for giving us your time and attention each and every week. And I appreciate that you have joined us.